We are here today to welcome to the Newton Brookline 4th Congressional District Forum. I'm Sharon Stout. I'm the chair of the Newton Democratic City Committee.
Hi, and I am Cindy Rowe, chair of the Brookline Democratic Town Committee.
We're so happy you were able to join us. We have over 350 people that have registered to attend this event tonight. And we will be recorded for those who want it after.
So, while our municipalities might be rivals in things like football, one thing we are united around is that we want to make sure that our next congressperson will represent our values in Washington, D.C.
Wanted to make sure that the voters of Brookline and Newton had the opportunity to meet the candidates one last time before early voting started. And while we all wish we could get together to meet each other in our own city committee groups, Zoom is our best alternative for now, so please bear with us.
As part of the registration process for tonight, we asked for your questions. We hope to cover as many as we can in the next 90 minutes, but we know we won't be able to get to every topic. But by the time we end this forum, we hope that you feel like you've met all the candidates in this race and understand their policy positions and what is motivating them to run.
So here's the format that we're going to be using for tonight. Each candidate will have 90 seconds for their opening remarks. Then they will be asked 3 popular hot topics, and they will each have 90 seconds to respond. After that, we'll give them 2 shorter questions for which they'll have 30 seconds to respond. And then we're going to move on to our lightning round, and there'll be very short questions. Each candidate has 15 seconds to answer. We'll end that with each candidate giving their closing statements at a minute each. We're going to be very strict with the timekeeping, so we apologize in advance if I have to cut anyone off. We will be holding up to 15 seconds, 5 seconds, and we will mute you guys if you go over, so let's all play nice. And with that, we'll start with opening statements. Cindy.
Yes, so maybe not in a surprise order. We're going to go in alphabetical order to start opening statements. These are 90 seconds each, and we are starting with Jake.
Good evening. I'm Jake Auchincloss. I am a Marine veteran, a city councilor in Newton, recently a new dad. Thank you to the Brookline and Newton Dems for organizing this. We were able to speak in person with both groups back in the fall. Feels like a long time ago, and it's good to be together again. Donald Trump's America is not the America I fought for as a Marine captain. It's not the America I've worked for as a city councilor in Newton. At a time when leadership has failed us in Washington, D.C., I will be a strong leader in Congress for the Massachusetts 4th to represent our values and our priorities. I will go toe-to-toe with the NRA and their Republican enablers. Because as a combat veteran, I know that no civilian needs an assault weapon or a high-capacity magazine. I will listen to science, not showboating, when it comes to beating the coronavirus and curbing climate change. I've been a 100% aligned voter with Green Newton priorities in the city of Newton, and the depth of the pandemic, I have reached out to experts on public health to help reassure and inform constituents. And finally, I'm going to be a champion for an inclusive economic recovery. As a city councilor in Newton, I've built coalitions to take on hard problems like housing and transportation and education. And when I earned the endorsement of Mayor Paul Coogan of Fall River, he cited his confidence in my ability to show up for the South Coast and be a champion for his constituents in his decision. Thank you.
Next, we go to Dave.
Well, thanks, Sharon and Cindy, and thank you all. I'm Dave Cavell, born and raised here in Brookline. The question tonight is, why vote for me instead of any of these good people? Well, first, there are 9 of us running. One of us could win with 20% of the vote. We need ranked choice voting. Second, a lot of people want to have this job. I know how to do it. Let's take gun violence. We all agree we need to stop the NRA and end gun violence. Today, AG Tish James in New York filed a lawsuit that could put the NRA out of business. That's the difference here. I spent 2.5 years as assistant AG to Maura Healey. We didn't just say the right things, we sued Donald Trump 50 times. We took on ExxonMobil and Purdue Pharma, and yeah, beat the NRA in federal court. I don't just think Trump is terrible, I helped sue him. I don't just miss Obama, I worked for him in the White House and saw how members of Congress can make real change. I don't just care about public education, I taught 4th grade in the South Bronx. I had a student who was homeless. He was 10. in the wealthiest country in the world. This is the 4th District. It's one of the leading Democratic seats in this country. We need someone who doesn't have to explain their past, but is ready to change our future by leading, including by passing the new John Lewis Voting Rights Act, whose 55th anniversary we mark today. I am thrilled to be supported by John Favreau and Ben Rhodes, by Brookline Select Board members and State Rep Mike Moran, and progressives like Chobi Hoy and Sheila Dechter. But the most important endorsement I'm seeking is yours. Thanks so much for having me tonight.
Next, we turn to Becky.
Thank you so much for having me tonight. I am Becky Grossman, and I'm a Newton City Councilor, but the job that I cherish most in my life is being a mom to my 2 kids, Madeline, who's 9, and Jack, who's 6. I am running for Congress with the fierce urgency of a mom, fed up by what is going on in this country and determined to make change. I want to start by sharing a story with you about my own mom, who was healthy and vibrant and active one day and incredibly sick the next. It turned out that she was diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disease, and I have stood by my parents as they have tried to navigate our incredibly fractured healthcare system over the last 4 years, and as we've been in and out of more hospitals than I care to count. It is not okay that it costs thousands of dollars a year in prescription drug costs in order for her to stay alive. And it's not okay that families all over this district and our country are in a position between having to choose between the cost of prescription drugs or the roof over their head or the food on their table. I refuse to allow special interests like Big Pharma, the NRA, and Big Oil to corrupt our government and to take power away from the people and rather put it towards their own special interests. And that's why I believe that we need to send new and different types of leaders to.
And next we go to Alan.
Thank you. We face an historic crisis, and we have an administration in Washington that is more sealed off than the NBA bubble. The good news is there's an extraordinary new energy in our streets, and we need to take that energy to our nation's capital. Politicians like Donald Trump will say, I alone can fix it. That approach has failed. I offer a different approach. It's not about me. It's about you. It's about us, the people. 30 years ago, my friends and I invented City Year to inspire young people to act on their idealism and discover their justice nerves from all different backgrounds to change the world. We built a movement, and now to spread City Year across the country and to inspire a miracle. And now 30 years later, more than 1.1 million people have dedicated a year of their lives to fighting poverty, fixing schools, caring for our seniors and veterans. I also built the coalition and the movement that passed 3 major pieces of federal legislation. And over Mitch McConnell's objections, we were able to pass the Kennedy Serve America Act in the first 100 days of the Obama administration. I'm just not offering a theory about how to make change. I've actually done it. I'm the only candidate in this race that's built a movement to bring billions of dollars in resources to Massachusetts, the 4th District, and across our country. I believe that we have to take this historic moment and unite people to get we the people to break open the doors of Congress and get the big transformational change that we all want. With your support, we can do that. Thank you.
Next is Ehsan.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for organizing this forum. We do not have time to waste. Tens of millions of Americans are unemployed and uninsured during a global pandemic. The fossil fuel industry is destroying our planet. Our Black and brown communities are being killed by police, and we have to act boldly, and we must act now. We need leaders who represent our diversity and our courage, who have the lived experiences to lead with compassion, and who are not afraid to take on the corrupt special interests. I came to this country when I was 20 years old from Morocco with nothing. I earned poverty wages, mopping the floors at restaurants, and I vowed to dismantle every oppressive system that denies us the basic necessities to live. Just 10 years later, I was a Wall Street regulator, taking on the biggest banks who gambled with our economy. I'm running to bring real change to Congress, and has been bought by Wall Street, and I do not accept $1 from corporate PACs or lobbyists. We must build an inclusive America where everyone is guaranteed healthcare, housing, clean air and clean water, high quality education, and a good paying job.
Thank you.
Natalia is up next.
Thank you so much. My name is Dr. Natalia Linas, and I'm an epidemiologist, a mom of 3 little kids. My daughter Amalia, the older one, is a Pierce student entering 2nd grade, and my twins Leo and Alexandra go to Temple Israel to daycare. They're 3 years old. And I share that because under normal circumstances, as a mom of 3 very young kids, I would probably be at home. But we're not living in normal circumstances. We're facing an unprecedented public health crisis that has transitioned into an economic crisis, a housing crisis, a racial justice crisis. And I entered this race because I have the unique skill set for the moment. I'm a social epidemiologist, and as a social epidemiologist, I know that health is shaped by the conditions of where we live, where we grow, where we play, where we love, and shaped by the access to healthcare that we have and whether we have it at all. And this country has failed too many Americans, and that has played out in 160,000 who have lost their lives, 5 million infected, and no path, no clear plan from the federal government. And a President Trump who is trying to scapegoat science and scientists. He pulled us out of the World Health Organization, so I'm stepping in. We can't trust that politicians will listen to scientists. We need to elect them. And right now, Congress only has 14 scientists, and I hope by the end of tonight, you'll know why I can be the 15th to represent you. Thank you.
Next, we have Jessie.
Well, thank you so much, Cindy and Sharon, and to both committees for organizing tonight. My name is Jessie Mermel, and I'm running for Congress to take on Donald Trump and his minions, fight for Medicare for all and reproductive justice, and lead an equitable recovery from COVID-19. You know, we have a crowded field here, but the people of the 4th Congressional District deserve a Congresswoman who can deliver on the bold progressive leadership that's necessary to lift up working families in this district. And I've built a 20-year career here in Massachusetts doing just that. From heading external affairs at Planned Parenthood, to serving side by side with Governor Patrick as part of his senior leadership team, to serving for 6 years on the select board in Brookline, and the work that I've done the past 5 years leading the state's progressive business organization. There are real differences in this race, differences in leadership style and in values, differences in experience. I'm one of few candidates in this race who's consistently supported the policies that are necessary to lift up families. Medicare for all, free public college and technical school tuition, student debt relief, and defunding police. I'm proud to have led this field in transparency by releasing my taxes now a month and a half ago, 6 years worth of taxes, because we need to run the exact opposite type of campaign from what Donald Trump would want, one rooted in transparency. I'm proud of the broad coalition we've built with Ayanna Pressley, NARAL, SEIU, and Brookline Newton leaders, now I think 43 of them, including former State Representative Frank Smisek and Newton Democratic City Committee Chair Sean Fitzgibbons. I hope to earn your vote.
Thank you. Next is Ben.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you again to the Newton and Brookline Democratic Committees for hosting tonight's forum. Today marks the 55th anniversary of when we passed the Voting Rights Act, one of the most significant pieces of legislation in our country. But one of the underlying reasons for systemic racism in our country has been our failure to support and protect voting rights. I pledge to you that I will fight to support and protect the voting rights of all Americans, especially those who have been historically disenfranchised. Another underlying reason for racism in this country is our lack of diverse leadership. That's why it's more important than ever that we elect a diverse leader like myself, who would be the first Latino ever elected to Congress from Massachusetts, who truly understands the diverse perspectives in our community. A leader who doesn't just talk about racism and fighting it, but who's been advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion for years. A leader who's a bridge builder, unifier, and a connector, and a leader who's going to amplify the voices of all our residents and not just the privileged few. I am that leader, and I look forward to tonight's conversation.
Thank you. And Chris has the last opening statement.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Chris Inetos, and I'm very happy to be here tonight. I'm an entrepreneur who's created 3 companies and hundreds of good paying jobs for people in Massachusetts. I've also created a nonprofit that brings together schools and companies to make STEM education and the opportunities it creates more accessible to people from marginalized communities, people of color, people from low income backgrounds. I'm running for Congress because I can't stand the thought of leaving to my children's generation a dysfunctional Congress and a country in which zip code and race are the prime determinants of whether your family can build a better life. The fact of the matter is you have 9 good people running for this position. They're all good people and they've done good things. The key for our voters is to figure out what is the most important experience to send to Washington over the next 2 years. We have a lot to fix: a healthcare crisis, a pandemic crisis, climate change. But the biggest underlying problem that we have that affects every other problem that we have and challenge that we face is the fact that we've got an economy that delivers for a few and leaves everyone else behind, that creates good jobs that can only be attained by spending $250,000 to get a college degree. There are only 6 people in Congress who have experience around these areas to understand the economic and technological drivers of inequality. And there are none in this race.
Thank you, Chris.
With that, we're going to move on to our questions. The first one is going to be economic inequality. The first question is going to go to Becky Grossman. What do you think are the main causes of economic inequality in our 4th Congressional District? And how would you address what you think is the most pressing issue within our district?
In our district, there is a 5 times differential from the north to the south end of this district with respect to annual median household income. That is not okay, and it is a microcosm of the economic inequality that is taking place all over this country. One of the very early commitments that I made in this campaign, if I'm so fortunate as to be elected, is to have a member of my staff whose priority focus is economic development in the South Coast, in the gateway cities, in those parts of our community in this district that have been struggling the most to come back from the 2008 recession and are economically devastated right now. I believe in small business investment and entrepreneurship as one tool to help to invest in the economic vitality of those communities and in the model of inclusive economic prosperity. And being well aware that those entrepreneurs who typically have had the hardest time getting access to capital, including minorities, women, veterans, the disabled, have been underbanked and have not had that access to capital as well as the technical assistance and training that they need to get their businesses off the ground. I also want to point to Brayton Point, a defunct coal-fired power plant in Somerset that stands poised to be a hub of the offshore wind renewable energy industry. Donald Trump is standing in the way of us being able to be a leader in this district in creating high quality, good paying jobs that simultaneously
Thank you, Becky.
lift up our economy. Thank you.
The next question is going to go to Alan. Do you need me to repeat it?
No. Sorry. No, I got the question. Thank you. I think the main cause of the economic disparity is that Boston and the northern part of our district, Brookline, Newton, Needham, Wellesley, et cetera, have access to Boston, and we are in the centerpiece of the 21st century knowledge economy. Whereas in the southern part of the district, South Coast, the gateway cities, they were giants in the 20th century industrial economy. So what I've done is put together a plan to figure out how we access and expand the Boston economic miracle to the southern part of the district. Here's some of the things we need to do. First of all, and I grew up in Kittanning, Pennsylvania, which is very similar to the South Coast. We have to make sure we have South Coast rail and that we electrify the grid. We have to make sure commuter rail works so that people can live in the southern part of the district and work in Boston if they want. And we can also have people from Boston travel to the southern part of the district, which is historic. Secondly, we need to have 1 million people in national service, which I've proposed. Third, we need to make sure that we support our small businesses, which is the engine of economic growth. Almost half the people in this district work in small businesses. I proposed emergency wage support rather than the loan program that didn't work to keep people in their jobs. Finally, we have to make sure we have an education system that works for everyone. It's because in the knowledge economy, you have to have good education. Those are some of the things I would do. Thank you.
Thank you. Hassan, next question. Would you like me to repeat it?
No, I'm all set. Thank you. We live in a gerrymandered district. It's not red to blue, it's top to down. We have some of the wealthiest towns in the country grouped with some of the poorest towns in the Commonwealth. And that was intentional. That's the way our politics work, unfortunately. For the history of this district, we never had a representative who does not take a dime from corporate PACs and lobbyists. So of course, it's been really hard for the poor communities and the economically challenged communities to have a say at the decision-making table and to have true representation. That's what I look to change. Reviving the economy of the South Coast is not just about renewable energy or schools or affordable housing or South Coast Rail. Reviving the economy of the South Coast in particular is about true representation that does not send staffers, that is actually present to organize with the people and listen to the people, not their politicians, to what they need. And that's what I've been doing throughout this historic congressional run for the past 15 months. But let's not forget about the communities in the wealthier part of the district who are also not living in that privilege, especially communities of color who do not have representation in our towns. We must fight for them too. And that means Medicare for all, a Green New Deal, and let's get corporate money out of politics.
Natalia?
Thank you. Thank you so much for that question. And I think when we talk about economic inequality, it's important to distinguish between income inequality and wealth inequality. And I want to focus on wealth inequality for a second, because I agree with what my colleagues have said. And wealth is about systemic issues. It touches on systemic racism. It touches on systemic disinvestment in some neighborhoods. It touches on how wealth is inherited and passed on, and our tax policy that has allowed for that wealth to be recreated. Right now, the net worth of a Boston family that is Black is $8 as compared to $250,000 for a white family. And that is simply unfair. On the income inequality side, I think it's important to call for minimum wage and ensuring that all wage laborers. I agree with Alan that a big inequality path is the fact that the geographic proximity to Boston has allowed for some jobs, but it also means that we just simply have not invested in enough good jobs and well-paying jobs in the southern part of the district. And transportation policy has to be part of the solution. So as someone who has studied income inequality in health and someone who has worked at the United Nations to fight income inequality, I know that there are many ways to go through this. And during COVID, we're going to need creative thinkers who can think about jobs and think about unemployment policy, who can think about reforming our tax policy and ensuring that as we recover from COVID, we do it in a way that works for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Jesse?
So Sharon, you asked what's causing this inequality. It's rooted in choices that our leaders have made over the course of generations to perpetuate 400 plus years of systemic racism, to perpetuate policies that are set up to hold people back. We're talking about everything from education and transportation and healthcare to the ways in which we treat workers. And the way I'm going to tackle that, quite frankly, is the way I've been tackling it here in Massachusetts for 20 years, to use the muscle that I've built fighting for workers throughout the 4th Congressional District and throughout Massachusetts here in the Commonwealth, and take that skill to Washington. I'll give you one example. I was on the 8-person team that negotiated the strongest paid family and medical leave law here in Massachusetts. Paid family and medical leave is a way in which we can tackle economic inequality, racial inequity, gender inequity, and, by the way, address major public health challenges that we're facing right now. We spent 7 months on that committee working, by the way, from day one where we didn't even agree on what problem we were trying to solve for. There are so many choices that we are going to have to make over and over again, choices that I'm committed to making when I'm in Washington that center equity, both economic, racial, gender, and more. I've built the muscle on this in Massachusetts. I've fought the fights and won. And I think in this crisis, it's important for us to make decisions around who can get the results that we need to tackle economic inequality and lift up working families.
Thank you. Ben?
Yes, thank you so much. Look, as I mentioned in our opening, one of the underlying reasons for systemic racism and economic injustice in this country is our lack of diverse representation and access to diverse leaders who truly understand the diverse perspectives of the community. Systemic racism and economic injustice have been enthralled through all of our systems, but I want to focus on two in particular: healthcare. We can't be the only industrialized nation in the world not to have paid family and medical leave. That will be the first thing that I work on when I go to Congress. We also have to talk about the affordability piece. We can't allow the federal government to be banned from negotiating prescription drug prices under Medicare. We also have to make sure we have coverage for everybody, including all of our undocumented immigrants, because we know when one person doesn't have coverage, they put themselves in danger and everyone else. Education. We need to have universal preschool because we know when people start writing and reading at the earliest ages, they have a better chance of being successful. We also have to work on student debt. It's a burden on people's, on the economy and on their wallets. And so we need to cap at the lowest small percentage point people's student debt. Finally, we need to give the skills and training to everyone who wants to move into new and jobs that will give them a higher standard of living. So we need free adult vocational education and training.
Thank you. Chris?
Thank you. So look, the cause of this is clear. Our economy over the past few decades have eliminated 20% of the middle class, middle wage jobs and replaced them with low wage jobs. We now have the highest unemployment in the country, and it runs from Fall River all the way up to Easton, which itself has a 17+% unemployment rate. We're here because of a failure of leadership. We don't have people in Congress who understand these issues. The things that we need to do to get out of this are to invest in our people in training and education, invest in 1 to 2 year programs in community colleges, which we can make affordable and even free in certain areas where we have job needs and unfilled jobs. We need to get our companies to engage to provide lifelong learning and apprenticeships. And I know this is possible because I've done this with Mass Bay Community College, State Street Bank, Harvard Pilgrim Health, and other great companies in our Commonwealth. We have to invest wisely to deal with climate change, not just use Brayton Point as a distribution and maintenance center, but we need to create manufacturing here in Massachusetts. Every wind turbine for that offshore wind farm will be imported from Europe. And with respect to small businesses, they can't get the loans because they don't have the banking relationships required by Congress. We have people in Congress who don't understand these issues, and we need to get people who understand it down there now.
Thank you. Jake?
Natalia made a really important point about wealth inequality versus income inequality. I want to try to build on that by talking about 3 issues in particular. First is education. The very first position I ever took when I ran for the Newton City Council was to expand pre-K, and I've since earned the support of 6 current or former chairs of the Newton School Committee because they've seen over the last 5 years how committed I am to education. We know that between the ages of 0 and 8, brain plasticity is at its highest, and if we can get kids into 3rd grade, literate, numerate, pro-social, they're set up for success in life. We have got to be a country that invests in high quality early education for every kid. Number 2 is transportation. Right now, we have a scenario in this district where you either pay too much for housing up north or you get a better rate on housing, but you're locked out of the economic engine of the greater Boston economy. And the way to solve that, or one of the ways to solve that, is to radically improve our transportation system. I've called for a new Eisenhower plan, but not for highways, for public transit, all electric regional rail, bus rapid transit, better infrastructure for cycling and walking, things that we know work, that other cities have made work, and that will radically improve opportunity. And then finally, jobs. I put forward a plan to build on the tailwinds of our life sciences manufacturing sector to create good, high-paying jobs, some that do and some that do not require associate or bachelor's degrees throughout the South Coast. When the Boston Globe endorsed me, they said I was the best candidate to represent a district of haves and have-nots, and it's because of that track record that I'm best prepared to do so.
Thank you. Dave?
Well, the key word we're looking for is intersectional. It's all related. COVID laid bare income inequality and systemic racism. Natalia, I agree with you. We have no safety net. And yes, there's a connection between race and economic inequality. We know that because George Floyd had COVID at the time of his murder. Black Americans make up about 13% of our population, 23% of COVID cases. High school graduation rates in Wellesley are 98%, and in Fall River are 73%. So everything we do has to be viewed with an equity lens. Every issue has to be addressed intersectionally. So let's start by saving our democracy, voting out people who demonize immigrants and don't recognize Black Lives Matter. This is why I got into politics, because I was teaching in the South Bronx, one of the poorest districts in America, about 20 minutes from some of the richest, and I've worked on these issues. I support Medicare for all and endorsed Elizabeth Warren because health inequality is quiet oppression. And this is a racial equity policy that will fully cover abortions and mental health and social determinants of health. Let's take on environmental racism because there's no justice without climate justice. We need a Green New Deal and to make Fall River the leader in offshore wind. We need to end ongoing redlining and discrimination in housing. Brookline for Everyone's done great work here. We need to end inequality in school funding, which is based on property taxes. And one of the first bills I want to introduce in Congress is something called the George Floyd Education Act. The idea is simple. Every student in America should learn our real history. That includes inequality and Black history. You shouldn't be able to graduate from high school without learning about John Lewis and Juneteenth.
Thank you, David.
We are going to move to our next question now. And our next question starts in the area of systemic racism. We've seen the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement. We've seen calls for police reform. And you've all referenced different areas where you have seen economic inequality. When you look around the district, we'd like to know from you, where have you seen the impacts of systemic racism in our congressional district? And what are the top 2 things that you would do about it? And we are going to start this question with Dave Cavell.
Well, thanks, Cindy. Look, systemic racism is real, and it's all around us. Look at any measure. A study that was published this July showed that almost all Black renters face discrimination in trying to rent housing here in Brookline and in Newton and other communities. It's present everywhere, environmental racism, you name it. So I'm one of the few candidates that has signed the Defund Newton Police Pledge. Let's start here. We can't just say the right thing. Candidates in this race have already voted against reallocating 1% of the Newton police budget to education and social services. I've called for reimagining and divesting from policing, banning chokeholds, establishing national standards for the police use of force, ending militarization and qualified immunity. Republicans have been defunding things for decades and calling it tax cuts for rich people. I think we need to fix that. And then second, let's take criminal justice. The criminal justice system is really good at criminalizing poverty and really bad at criminal justice. When I was working with Maura Healey, I went to restorative justice retreats at Norfolk MCI. That's why I support the First Step Act and the People's Justice Guarantee. Mass incarceration is the new Jim Crow. So let's legalize marijuana and expunge convictions, repeal mandatory minimums, end cash bail, end for-profit prisons, end felon disenfranchisement, end the death penalty. I mean, these are the basic cores of the things that we need to do, but we need to integrate justice into everything we do. That's what I'm going to do in Congress.
Thank you.
Our next candidate is Becky Grossman.
Thank you. Systemic racism is real. It's real in Newton and Brookline, and it's real in every single community in this district and throughout this country. I believe that police reform is needed, that the systemic racism ingrained in our police forces is something that we need to be honest about and confront head on. And yes, we do need to invest in education, mental health, and rehabilitation, which have been underfunded for far too long. And then we have to do a lot more because we have to go system by system and talk about housing justice, education justice, economic justice, climate justice, and voting rights. To take housing justice, I have been an unwavering advocate and supporter of affordable housing in Newton and in my time as a Newton City Councilor. And I am proud to have supported the Northland Project and many other initiatives that we've had before us that will help move our immediate community of Newton in the right direction on this topic. But there's not a single city or town that I have visited in this district where the topic of affordable housing hasn't been raised. And we've got a lot more to do. The federal government has to step up to the plate here and be willing to play a role in incentivizing communities to do the right thing. And that's, again, just scratching the surface on the other topics that I mentioned, and I'm looking forward to diving into more deeply as we continue this conversation.
Thank you. Alan, you're the next candidate up.
Fighting for racial justice has been a central cause of my life. We started City Year as a way to help complete the civil rights movement because we changed laws in the 1960s, but you only change hearts and minds through experience. We started in Boston because of Boston's history of systemic racism. We brought together young people from all the neighborhoods of Boston, Roxbury, Dorchester, Southie, but also Newton, Brookline, Wellesley, and Dover. And we've seen that that works. Here's what I will do. First of all, we need a federal jobs guarantee because, as Natalia said, the gap between what Black families have and what white families have is huge. For the country, it's $17,000 for the average Black family. It's $170,000 for a white family. Secondly, part of that should be 1 million young people in national service. Imagine 1 million young people all serving side by side from different backgrounds, working together and learning that our diversity is our greatest strength. Third, I propose something called Restore the Dream accounts. This would be the federal government through the estate tax, putting $15,000 in every child when they're born. By the time they're 19, it's worth $50,000. They get that by just doing 1 year of national service. And it's their asset building account so that we can close the wealth equality gap. Finally, I proposed an American Truth, Justice, and Reconciliation Commission with Cornell William Brooks. I'm honored he's supporting me, and Hubie Jones is supporting me, and Colette Phillips and Susan Rice. Thank you.
Hassan, next.
Thank you. I was the first candidate to sign on the Defund the Police in Newton, and that was after I sat down with the members of the movement and we put together the agenda that was proposed. And I'm very proud to continue that organizing here in Brookline, in Milford, in Taunton, in Fall River, and across the district. We have a coalition of members of the movement who are looking to unite our communities and bring that solidarity that's very much needed. But furthermore, as Congresswoman, I hold a special space as a person of color, as an immigrant, as a Muslim who's married into the Jewish community, as a mom, as a lot of identities that have allowed me to build this multiracial, multi-generational movement that would stand for justice here at home and across the world. And with that, when I'm in Congress, I will work to end qualified immunity, to close the military to police pipeline, and to move away from the current punitive approach towards a society that is built on restorative justice and compassion. And that means investing in education, in healthcare and mental health services and housing, so we can create that healthy and safe community for everyone, no matter their colors, no matter their skin color or the country where they were born.
Thank you. Natalia, next.
Thank you so much. And your question was, where have we seen systemic racism play out most dramatically? And I think health is clearly one of those areas. A wealthy neighborhood in Newton has a life expectancy that is 26 years longer than a poor neighborhood in New Bedford. That is simply unacceptable. And we are seeing this play out right now in COVID. But what is important to highlight is not that race is responsible, but racism. I have worked on racism in health for 10 years. At the New York City Health Department, I helped reframe the entire conversation from income inequality in health to how racism was killing Black moms, Black babies at disproportionate rates, was leading to premature mortality for every single person of color in New York. And that's the case here in Massachusetts too. We need to talk about systemic racism as something that can't be fixed with a Band-Aid. Of course, I will fight for Medicare for all. Of course, I will fight for the Green New Deal, but I'm also going to fight for reparations, because until we're ready to admit that 400 years of slavery, Jim Crow, and the federal government's policies of redlining, of excluding agricultural workers, excluding domestic workers during the Social Security Act of 1935 has created an unfair playing ground. We simply cannot address systemic racism just by focusing on today. Our history and our future depends on us making real change. And now is the moment, and health data will help us fight for that. Thank you so much.
Next is Jessie.
Thanks, Cindy. You know, systemic racism is real and it is pervasive throughout the 4th Congressional District and throughout our country. And it's tough to single out one example that stands out. But I have to say, a few weeks ago, I had a conversation with a mother who was one of the founders of an organization called Raising Multicultural Kids. It's based in Easton, and it's for families with Black and Brown children being raised in Easton and the surrounding communities. And she told me about her own children's experience and the experience of some other children whose families participate in the organization, facing issues of racism and microaggressions in their school and in their community, and trying to work with their neighbors and with officials in town to address it in an adequate and appropriate way. And listening to the ways in which this was impacting families in our district every single day. We all know the statistics. We all understand how pervasive it is. But when you have a conversation with a family, with a parent who's directly impacted, it sticks with you in a really important way. There are so many things that we have to do, Cindy, to address systemic racism in this district and in this country. Narrowing it down to 2 is virtually impossible. What I will say is that clearly we have to prioritize addressing the criminal legal system and addressing policing. I absolutely support Congresswoman Presley's People's Justice Guarantee, and I'm proud to have her endorsement in this race. But the second thing I'll say is that my job will be to center racial justice in every decision I make, because there is no policy that is absent from the intersection of systemic racism and issues in this country.
Thank you. Ben, you're up next.
Thank you so much. You asked the first question of where are we seeing systemic racism in this district. I can tell you it is everywhere. I know this because I'm the only candidate who has participated in over 20 marches, rallies, vigils across 15 different cities and towns in this district. I'm the only candidate who from day one on their platform had combating hatred, bigotry, and anti-Semitism. So I'm not just talking about it now because it's convenient. I'm talking about it because it's a major part of our policies. Now, in addition to the police reforms that we've talked about, you asked about what are 2 things that we can do. Number 1 is we have to elect and select diverse leaderships who understands the diverse perspectives of their communities. For example, we have in our K through 12 right now, 20% of our students in Massachusetts are Latino, and only 3% of the students are. They need role models and leaders who look like them, who understand them, that can help them be successful. We need that in our nonprofit boards, in our for-profit boards. We need that in our political leadership as well, across the board. Number 2 is no one's born a bigot. No one is born a racist. We are teaching that in our society. So we need to unteach that and teach our youth at the earliest of ages that lies, stereotype, and prejudice can turn into hate and far worse. And we need to teach cultural competency and bias and diversity training to all of our leaders, civic, religious, education, and political leaders.
Thank you. Chris, you're next.
Thank you. So as an MIT graduate, I believe in data, and the data is clear. Anyone can see it by just going to the FBI website. We have systemic racism in our policing. The first thing we need to do is pass the Justice and Policing Act that has been put forth by Senators Booker and Harris. We have got to create greater transparency and require greater transparency of reporting. We've got to add additional and better training. We've got to demilitarize the police. We also have to encourage our communities to come together and look at the systemic problem. I'm a cybersecurity person. We look at prevent, detect, respond. Policing is only part of that. And it's great to see groups created like Mayor O'Connell in Taunton creating her Unite group to bring the community together to look at all of the issues, including mental health, education, et cetera. But we have to also remember we cannot have social justice without economic justice. There are too many obstacles that face our people from low-income backgrounds and people of color. And by the way, people of color are disproportionately represented in those communities. There are healthcare obstacles, access to healthcare, educational obstacles. And I've seen this visiting Resiliency Prep in Fall River. Their students cannot stay late for work after school because they can't get bus service to get back home. We have to have leaders who understand these issues and take action to eliminate these obstacles.
Thank you. And the final answer to this question is from Jake.
A few weeks ago, Donald Trump instructed his HUD secretary to basically undermine the administration's own affirmatively furthering fair housing policies. And then the president tweeted that basically suburbs would no longer have to worry about low-income housing being built there. It was just the latest example of him throwing away the dog whistle and just going straight for a racist remark. And unfortunately, Massachusetts and the Massachusetts Fourth has its own history of exclusionary zoning. And I have seen that in my own hometown of Newton, which I love dearly, but which I've also pushed to better meet its progressive aspirations by creating an inclusionary housing policy. It's one of the reasons I have the support of housing and civil rights advocates in Newton, why I was endorsed for my third term of city council by Progressive Newton, because I've taken hard votes to build the housing that we need to truly become a more welcoming city. I also want to point out a particular job category that I have been working with for a number of years in both the private sector and the public sector that I think is really at the intersection of a lot of challenges with systemic racism. That's home care aides. Home care aides are disproportionately female, disproportionately Black and brown, disproportionately immigrant. And because of our graying demography as a state, they're in high demand. And they are dealing with a number of challenges, transportation, health, being on the front lines of the COVID response. And they are themselves some of the biggest victims of our failure as a government to ensure that everybody has equal access to opportunity.
Thank you all. We're going to move on to our next question. COVID-19 has shown us how fragile our economy is here, and particularly when it comes to housing and healthcare costs. How would you address these two issues in a way that would help stabilize our district's households? And I'm going to start that question with Alan.
As I've traveled across the district, I've heard a lot about this. The issue of affordable housing is everywhere. In the northern part of the district, it's about seniors being able to stay in their homes as property taxes rise, or it's about making sure that our communities are still accessible so we can maintain the diversity that we all want. In the southern part of the district, it's about making sure that people have access to healthcare. And as we've seen with the coronavirus, it's attacking more low-income people and more people of color. Here's what I would do. First of all, I would support legislation in Congress and champion it to make sure that towns and cities that give seniors a break on their property taxes can get subsidized by the federal government. So as housing values rise, they don't have to pay more. Secondly, I'm for Medicare for all who want it, a strong public option. I supported that 10 years ago. I also believe we need to bring down healthcare costs by making sure that we get the money out of politics and allow the federal government, which is the biggest buyer of prescription drugs through Medicare and Medicaid, to negotiate with the pharmaceutical companies. We could save hundreds of billions of dollars that way and provide healthcare to everyone. Third, I think we need to have an expanded sense of what healthcare is now. The fight has been around personal health insurance, which we need, but now we have to understand that we have to rethink how we have a strong public health system. That includes support for people who suffer with mental illness. I'm the parent of teenagers. 60% of our teenagers are suffering from severe anxiety and depression. But we can't get health coverage for them. We have to do that. Folks dealing with the opiate addiction, we have to move from criminal care to health care.
Hassan, you're next, dear.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, great. So housing and healthcare, these are issues that I have lived and seen in our district. And I'll tell you a little story. I met immigrants who were coming here but with a green card from Algeria. The mom was pregnant and had a little toddler. She had been 15 years a nurse in Algeria. Her husband was a telecom engineer. And when they came here, they could not afford housing in Brookline. We hosted them for 3 months. We looked for housing. No way. Not a single landlord would even take them because they didn't have the necessary background checks and et cetera, and the list goes on. But the other issue is that even in Brookline, which is a wealthy town, people who are living in public housing are living in mold. And as you travel across the district, you start to see more and more disparities in housings. I'm the only homes guarantee candidate, which is why I've been endorsed by Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, a champion of the homes guarantee, which is part of the Green New Deal, where we will build millions of green, affordable units across our country. This district is in a desperate need for bringing federal funding that would be funneled towards the community.
Natalia?
Thanks so much for the question. And I think it was linked to how COVID-19 requires us to pay attention specifically to housing and healthcare. And within this context, I think first on healthcare, it is important to point out that millions of Americans not only have lost their jobs, but lost their healthcare in the midst of a global pandemic. So one plan and one strategy is unemployment benefits. The minute you apply, you should be able to automatically enroll for Medicaid. We should not have just COBRA and options that are too costly for too many families. No family should be left without health insurance right now during such a critical period. So that's step one. Second is to deeply invest in our public health infrastructure. And we have contact tracing that will need to, put out people to be doing contact tracing. These same people can be helping families reach other benefits, whether it's housing or food related or employment, unemployment benefits, contact traces. This public health workforce can be put to work to do all of those wraparound social services. The third is we need to invest in health technology. And we have seen, the Trump administration put so much money into this vaccine, but nothing for testing. Right now, I was talking to a volunteer in Fall River and her husband got tested and he expects to get his result in 10 days. That is useless. In 10 days, everything could have changed. So we need to invest in testing. On the housing front, we need to ensure that we have a moratorium, extending moratorium on evictions and on rent, but we need a systemic solution so that this isn't just pushing it down the line. Thanks.
Jesse?
We need Medicare for all, and we need to invest in and incentivize more affordable and workforce housing in this district. I've worked for 2 different direct service healthcare providers, Planned Parenthood League of Massachusetts and the Mass Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired, located on Ivy Street in Brookline. And I have seen the challenges that the people we served face when it comes to accessing and affording the care that we need. Medicare for all is the way in which we create a system that everyone can access, everyone can afford, and where we have prescription drug prices that don't cause people to lay awake at night. I believe that Medicare for all is the way in which we create a healthcare system that works for everyone, whether it's around reproductive healthcare, mental healthcare, long-term disability, dental healthcare, and so much more. It's a racial equity issue. It's about recovering from COVID. It's about economic equity. And I'm very committed to making it happen in Washington. And I'm so proud to have the endorsements in this race of the Mass Nurses Association and SEIU, thousands and thousands of people in this district on the front lines of the fight for healthcare. I'm also so proud to have been honored last year by CHAPA, one of the leading housing organizations in Massachusetts, for my work advocating for more affordable housing in my role leading the Progressive Business Organization in Massachusetts. We need to increase the low-income housing tax credit. We need more funding for Section 8 and Section 202 housing, more capital funds invested in housing, and we need to make sure that we're offering carrots and sticks to incentivize municipalities to make the zoning changes necessary to allow for increased housing density. These issues are related, and I'm going to fight for them when I'm in Congress.
Ben?
Thank you so much. When it comes to the healthcare cost and parts of this, we absolutely right away need to have emergency paid family and medical leave for at least 2 weeks. And then we need to have permanent paid family and medical leave. Again, so we're not the only industrialized country in the world that doesn't have it. We need to have universal access to high quality, affordable healthcare for everyone, including our undocumented immigrants. We need to make sure that that mental health, that those seeking mental health access to healthcare get that, and that insurance companies are banned from discriminating against those seeking mental health access. When it comes to housing, we absolutely immediately must have a national moratorium on all evictions and all foreclosures. But look, my father worked for HUD for over 20 years, helping to audit public housing authorities in Taunton and Fall River. We know in our housing, the public housing authorities, there was massive systemic racism in that because they were all put in certain places together and not apart. So we need to bring everyone together to create multi-use housing that has increases in low-income housing tax credit, historical tax credits, where we have affordable housing, middle income housing, standard rate housing. We also need to give more incentives to our developers to build these housing. And finally, we need to end exclusionary zoning laws and revise all of our zoning laws so that we can create transit-oriented communities that are hubs for combating racism and anti-Semitism and bigotry, because we're all together.
Chris, you're up next.
Thank you. So I hope that we get to address some other parts of your question, because the pandemic has shown us where we are not resilient in so many ways, but clearly housing and healthcare are key areas. Relative to housing, there are three things that we should focus on doing. Number one is the federal government can, as other candidates have talked about, break down the barriers and the red tape and the policies that prevent the creation of more affordable housing. But in addition, we should look at improving public transportation to enable people to access their jobs and other services from areas where there are more affordable housing stocks. And finally, we should be encouraging and incenting our companies to move into areas and bring businesses and jobs to where the people are. There's a great company called Sexzeta that just moved into Fall River over the past year, a security company. We need more like that. Sometimes we forget a congressperson's job is only part of the time down in Washington. I will be in our district working with companies in our state and outside of our state to bring those jobs into our communities where we need the jobs. And then finally, relative to healthcare, we need to ensure that we have universally available healthcare, quality healthcare for everyone, while ensuring that people can keep their private insurance if they like it. We also have to make sure that healthcare services are available, and investing in more community health services in all of our communities.
Thank you. Jake?
Sharon, would you mind repeating the question? The other candidates' answers are making me think you asked about COVID, but I just heard about housing and healthcare.
Well, I did. So COVID-19 has shown us how fragile our economy is here in our area, particularly when it comes to housing and healthcare. How would you address these two issues?
I apologize. I missed that first part of it. So housing, we need the low-income housing tax credits that have been effective in creating some low-income housing in places throughout the Massachusetts Fourth. But you can't talk about housing without talking about transportation. I've seen this in my work as a city councilor. In general, constituents are oftentimes excited about new developments, about putting in new housing, mixed use, more retail, but there is incredible skepticism about the ability of our infrastructure in this state to withstand greater density. And until government proves to its constituents that our transportation is up to the task, we're not going to have the kind of popular support at the local level for building more housing that we really need. And we have to build a lot more housing to actually put downward pressure on prices, like hundreds of thousands of units in the greater Boston area. So that is why I put forward at the beginning of this campaign a comprehensive plan to reinvent transportation in this state. We need to put a price on carbon, and then we need to invest a huge chunk of that reserve into greening our infrastructure, and in particular to reinventing our transportation system, which accounts for 40% of the carbon emissions in this state. Now, on healthcare, we have got to finally let Obamacare succeed. For 10 years, Republicans have been thwarting it at every opportunity, at every angle, state by state. We need to introduce a public option, strengthen the individual mandate, and finally make sure that prescription drug prices do not eat an ever larger share of the wallet for senior citizens especially.
Thank you. Dave.
Either one's fine. So the bad news is these issues are hard. The good news is we know the solutions. On healthcare, it's Medicare for all. I love the ACA. I was actually in the Obama White House when we expanded it to 26 million Americans and helped protect the entire ACA in federal court, including contraceptive coverage for 55 million people in the AG's office. We need to go further. We talk about the cost of moving to a new system. Look at the costs of not. Millions of Americans lost not just their jobs, but their health care. COVID rates have skyrocketed in Black and Brown and immigrant communities. Black and Indigenous women still have maternal mortality rates 3 times higher than white women. And second, on housing, it's a human right. But as I said, Black applicants and Section 8 applicants, including one I represented when I was a lawyer in private practice, still face discrimination in our communities, including Brookline and Newton. Redlining is not over. So first, let's investigate and crack down on housing discrimination. HUD and the Department of Justice need to hold people accountable. Let's protect renters during the pandemic and prevent homelessness with eviction moratoriums. And then, of course, I do agree with the others. We need to create more affordable housing while working on transportation and education and all the rest. I launched a housing policy which builds on Elizabeth Warren's plan. It's intersectional, and it's in part about the tax code. The estate tax threshold was $7 million when President Bush left office. Now it's $22 million. That's insane. The wealthiest families in this country have to pay a little bit more to reduce rents and build affordable housing.
Thank you. Becky?
Well, first of all, we need a healthcare system that works for everyone and a more resilient economy. And with respect to healthcare, health outcomes in Black and Brown communities during COVID have shown that we have utterly failed. I believe that healthcare is a human right and that every person in this country deserves access to quality, affordable care. That is why I support a public option on the pathway to Medicare for all, because to my mind, a public option is the way that we can get individuals and families covered quickly. Now, with respect to a more resilient economy, we need an economy that supports working families, and that includes universal pre-K, affordable childcare, and paid family and medical leave. And to highlight the childcare issues for a minute, we have also utterly failed to support our childcare industry and address this during COVID, but that is only exacerbating the major problems that we had in this area well beforehand, and that we are going to have to figure out as we're finding our way out of this pandemic and beyond. We know how when we invest in the first years of a child's life, that pays dividends throughout their lives, and how the inequities that take place in education and economic outcomes begin in early childhood. And that is a major focus for me as your next member of Congress.
Thank you, Becky.
Now we are going to go into a segment of 30-second questions, which will be extremely challenging for all of you. But here we go. As you have traveled throughout the district over this past year, what are the top 3 issues you think your future constituents would want you to tackle first in Congress? And the first answer on this will come from Ehsan.
Over the past 1.5 years, it's been transportation, affordable housing, the climate injustice, and now it's COVID first.
Thank you. The next answer is from Natalia.
So I entered the race during COVID, and what I've been hearing is COVID, but that includes, will schools open this fall and how will they open safely? Second question has been climate change. How do we ensure that this emergency that we're facing doesn't mean that we forget about the real existential emergency? And third is, what are you going to do about racial justice and George Floyd's murder? And how are you going to solve for that? Thank you.
Next is Jesse.
I hear about fighting for a healthcare system that works for everyone. I hear about leading an equitable recovery to COVID-19. And I hear about people wanting someone who is going to hold Donald Trump accountable.
Ben, you have the next answer.
Thank you so much. As the only candidate who's actually visited all 34 cities and towns, I actually know the answer to this because I've been there listening to all the residents. Number one is healthcare. Number two is student debt. And since the start of COVID-19, it's how do we respond to it in order to contain COVID-19 and support all of our communities, especially the most vulnerable.
Chris.
So I've been biking through every community in our district, talking to small business owners and our residents, and there are clearly three things that they're concerned about. One, this economic catastrophe and the impact on their financial security. Two, how do we actually make progress on climate change, which is getting worse every day and harder to fix every day? But the most common thing I hear is we need to stop the hyper-partisanship down in Washington and send people down there who know how to bring people together to get things done.
Thank you. Jake.
Number one, fighting Trumpism tooth and nail, not just defeating him, but pulling out by root all of his enablers. Number two, listening to science when it comes to COVID and the environment. And then number three, prescription drug prices, which take an ever larger share of people's wallets.
Dave.
Well, this debate's on Zoom. So number one is COVID and school reopenings. Governor Baker, if you're watching, why is indoor dining still open? Rates are going up. Number two, climate crisis. Young people watching want to know if they're going to be able to breathe the air and drink the water. You know, just little basic things when they grow up. We don't have time to waste. We need to pass a Green New Deal. Three is saving our democracy. Stacey Abrams should be the governor of Georgia. She's not because of voter suppression. Let's get dark money out of politics. Let's end partisan gerrymandering and save the democracy.
Thank you. Becky.
Economic justice, healthcare justice, and authentic leadership. Fixing a broken Washington, which to my mind comes down to getting money out of politics and electing leaders who are going to stand up for working families and look at each issue through the lens of what protects the long-term best interest for our families and the generations to come, which is the brand of leadership that I offer and why I talk so much about being a mom, because that's what I wake up thinking about every single day.
And finishing off this question, Alan. Alan, you're on mute.
Sorry. It's all COVID now. And that has to do, first of all, with healthcare and making sure that everybody has it and make sure that we can safely reopen the economy. Next is jobs, because so many people have lost their jobs, especially small businesses. Third is education. Parents like myself and my wife, how do we reopen the schools safely? I'm also doing something different, which is I'm putting together a plan for all 34 cities and towns, looking at what are the specific needs in those towns and what can I do as a potential congressperson to help leverage the resources they have and
Thank
be ready
you.
for the new deal.
We're going to move on to the second question. Everyone approaches this job with their own sense of style. What do you feel is your own unique character trait that you possess that will be important to your future role as a congressperson, and how will it make you more effective? And we're going to start that off with Jesse.
I think I bring the skills and the quality and the style of a collaborator. I've been working in roles throughout my career that have required me to bring together people who might not always agree on everything from day one. But I've always been interested in bringing people together in the room, finding the common ground, and mapping a path forward. I did that on paid family and medical leave here in Massachusetts. It resulted in the strongest paid family and medical leave law in the country, something I'm looking to replicate in Washington. And I want to bring that collaborative style to the 4th Congressional District as your next Congresswoman.
Ben?
Yes, thank you. I think it's my approach. The entire theme of our campaign shows that we, the fourth, we are all in this together, all 34 cities and towns. It's also being a bridge builder, a connector, a unifier. And finally, it's someone who listens to, understands, stands with, and amplifies the voices of everyone in the district and not just the privileged few.
Thank you. Chris?
So it's the ability to bring people together to solve tough problems that people don't think can be solved in a way that everybody wins. This is what I've done in my career as an entrepreneur, creating solutions to problems people thought couldn't be solved, working with people. This is what I've done in my career with STEM Match, my nonprofit, bringing companies and schools together that wouldn't normally work together to solve the problem of access to opportunity from people from marginalized communities. And this is what's so sorely needed down in Washington to get progress. Win-win solutions around the table.
Thank you. Up next is Jake.
I've always tried to be thoughtful about complicated issues in Newton and explaining them and explaining how I've decided to vote to my constituents. And I would like to take that same thoughtful approach to Congress because these issues are challenging and you need to be able to substantively break them down to really solve them. Number two is toughness. Whether it was Marine interrogation training or local politics or this own campaign, I've never been afraid to take heat. And I'm tough enough to be in the fight of our lives for the soul of our nation next term.
Thank you. Dave?
Well, the word's experience. Experience on the issues. Experience with Michelle and Barack Obama and Deval Patrick and Maura Healey, who saw herself as the people's lawyer. That's what shaped me. It's not enough to have a few coffees in the district. I've committed to traveling offices. It's not enough to have a website just in English. 20% of students in Fall River speak Portuguese or Spanish as a first language at home. Mine's the only website that's been fully in English, in Spanish and Portuguese as well since day one. And I know how to talk about these issues. As a speechwriter, I can tell our stories. We need that.
Thank you. Becky?
It's the urgency that I feel in fighting for our shared values. I talk a lot about being a mom to 2 young kids because I have a stake in the fight to leave a better world for the next generation for all of our kids. I wake up every day thinking about how we are going to protect the long-term best interests for our kids, our families, and our planet. That is the urgency, passion, and commitment that I'm going to bring to this role.
Thank you. Alan?
I'm a son of immigrants, and everything for me starts with the values my parents taught me of empathy, service. My mom was a nurse, my father was a doctor, of giving and love. I've learned it's more to be proximate. My approach has been to try to listen and empower. I've learned that there is nothing more powerful than people united with shared values and common purpose, fighting for change and idealism. And that's the approach that I would try to take if I had the privilege of serving.
Thank you. Hassan?
Thank you. You know, I bring the diversity and courage of the people in our districts. I bring no fear to stand up to Trump and to stand up to the corporate greed that has built him and made him happen. I have fought that corporate greed as a Wall Street regulator, and I have the lived experiences that reflect the pain and trauma that our communities have been throughout the past generations.
Thank you. Natalie?
So I think the character trait is that I'm a systems thinker. I can think about trade-offs. I can think about health at the same time as I'm thinking about climate and racial justice and poverty and jobs. And that has been the characteristic that has made me, allowed me to be in leadership positions as a senior advisor to the head of the UN Development Program, as a science advisor to the New York City Health Commissioner, and has led me to support governments in setting good policies and regulations. I'm also an inclusive leader. I have led teams that are multi-ethnic and multi-religious. Thanks.
Thank you.
Now, if you thought that was a fast round, we are going into what we're calling our lightning round. So these are 15-second answers. Our first question is on climate change. What is the first measure you would propose to address climate change? 15 seconds. We start with Ben.
Thank you. I would create an environmental lens office that looks at every piece of legislation through the lens of its effect on the environment and all the people affected by changes in the environment.
Next is Chris.
I would create an incentive for the creation of wind turbine manufacturing in our district so that we can get more jobs and improve the climate at the same time.
Jake.
Carbon pricing to fund green infrastructure.
Dave.
Well, how many times can I say Green New Deal in 15 seconds? We can't elect somebody in this district who takes fossil fuel money and has a super PAC supporting them. One of us is taking fossil fuel money. One of us sued fossil fuel companies. Who do we trust to lead the climate fight and pass the Green New Deal?
Becky.
An infrastructure package. I do support the Green New Deal and believe as we're coming out of the pandemic that we have a moment to put a lot of people back to work while simultaneously tackling our climate goals and building the green infrastructure and clean energy jobs of the future.
Thank you.
Alan.
Sorry, Green New Deal, put a price on carbon and use that money to have a clean energy revolution, but mostly build a coalition of the Sunrise Movement, Sierra Club, NRDC, League of Conservation Voters, and others, so that we can tap the energy in our streets and finally break the logjam that the fossil fuel companies have on Congress and get the will.
Thank you. Ehsan.
Thank you. The Green New Deal, absolutely. But as a Wall Street regulator who understands federal regulation, I'm the only one qualified here to fight against the fossil fuel corporations and guarantee a just transition of labor.
Natalia.
Also agree with the Green New Deal, but as someone who has worked on the global stage on climate change, we need to enter the Paris Agreement immediately because our leadership on the climate front will mean other countries will lead too, and climate change is not going to be solved by the US alone.
And the final answer from Jesse.
All in for a Green New Deal. I've been working on these issues for years in Massachusetts. We need carbon pricing. We need to invest in transportation infrastructure. We need a commuter rail system that works, a green line that works. We need South Coast Rail, and we need equitable investments in our regional transit authorities in the southern part of the district.
Our next round is going to be on reproductive rights. How would you summarize your position on reproductive choice and why? And our first person is going to be Natalia.
Fully pro-choice because this is about human rights. It's about health. It's about our future. Roe versus Wade, we need to make sure we get rid of the Hyde Agreement and stop the global gag rule.
The next person is Jake.
Women must control their own reproductive decisions because it's a human right, because it's about dignity, and because it's about equality. And we must not just have the laws, but the funding to support that.
Dave.
Abortions or healthcare. Pro-choice. I admire Jesse's plan on this issue. Mine's similar. Codify Roe, repeal Hyde, end the global gag rule. Let's end the tampon tax. Almost half of low-income women have had to choose between menstrual products and a meal. And let's also get true reproductive justice for all.
Thank you. Becky?
I would describe my position on this as unwavering. Politicians have absolutely no business interfering with or dictating personal decisions about reproductive health. We've got to repeal Hyde, lift the global gag rule, and expand Title X funding.
Thank you. Alan?
I am 100% pro-choice, always have been, always will be. We should repeal the Hyde Amendment. We should drop the global gag rule. We should follow Elizabeth Warren's lead and codify Roe in Congress so the Supreme Court can't overturn it. We need to let women make these decisions and give access to low-income women so they have the same rights.
Thank you. Hassan? You're on. We can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Bear with me. A lot of technical issues today. But look, I love Jessie's plan. I love the work she has done for reproductive justice. I have lived that situation. I have survived an illegal abortion in Morocco that almost took my life. So I am going to be unwavering when it comes to that fight. And I will fight the Republicans and everyone who's against our reproductive justice.
Chris, you're next.
Honestly, I think we're all of the same mind on this. I'm 100% pro-choice. I believe we need to remove the global gag rule, eliminate Hyde, codify Roe v. Wade, expand Title X. I think we all believe the same things in this area.
Thank you. Jessie?
I would describe it as the boldest, most comprehensive, most experienced position on reproductive health in this race. I'm the former head of external affairs at Planned Parenthood. Just yesterday was endorsed by NARAL. And I'd note, to the best of my knowledge, the only candidate in this race talking about the 3 crisis pregnancy centers in this district, putting the health of residents of the 4th Congressional District at risk every day.
Thank you. Rounding out with Ben, please.
Thank you. Absolutely 100% pro-choice. Women must have the rights, responsibilities, and the respect to make decisions about their own bodies, about their own healthcare decisions. Repeal Hyde, expand Title X, and codify Roe v. Wade.
Thank you.
And our final question in this round. What do you think is the most important gun violence prevention measure that Congress could enact? We start this round with Jake.
Banning assault weapons and high-capacity magazines and taking guns out of the hands of domestic abusers and universal background checks.
Dave.
Well, getting rid of the NRA. They're why we can't reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act. Strong gun laws save lives. And I actually took on the NRA and beat them in the Attorney General's office. Assault weapons bans, universal background checks on guns and ammo. You name it. We need to do it. Strong gun laws save lives. I'm proud to be endorsed by Moms Demand Action.
Thank you, Dave.
Becky.
First of all, getting money out of politics so we can take on the NRA. Restoring the assault weapons ban and banning high-capacity magazines, universal background checks, closing the gun show loophole, a national red flag law, and disarming domestic abusers.
Alan.
A universal background checks, banning assault weapons, high-capacity magazines, taking on the NRA, but also supporting March for Our Lives. I worked with them to build the 800 sibling marches. We have to unite this movement and put the pressure on Congress so we get this done.
Hassan.
Okay, thank you. Look, I've had a gun pointed at my head, and I've watched my friend lose her husband across the street from gun violence. As I took on the biggest banks in this country, I am experienced to take on the NRA. I will work to expand background checks and ban the sale and distribution of assault weapons and implement a buyback program.
Natalia.
I agree with many of the colleagues. We need to take on the NRA. We need to admit to ourselves that our country has more gun violence than any other country in the world. We need to address this as a public health epidemic. We need to put in place universal measures. We need to get rid of assault weapons. And we need to pay attention to suicide too, which is also the result of guns.
Thank you. Jessie.
I'm proud to have the seal of approval from Moms Demand Action in this race because I support the assault weapons ban, reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act, universal background checks, and holding gun manufacturers accountable. But the most important thing we can do is go out there and win elections in November to elect candidates who will stand up to the NRA.
Ben.
Absolutely. Also very happy about having the Moms Demand Action endorsement as well. We need stronger gun licensing laws, gun identification requirements, banning assault weapons and ammunition, and making sure we have universal background checks on both guns and ammunition.
And finishing this round, Chris.
Again, I think we're very much aligned in this. Assault weapons ban, high capacity magazine ban. We've got to eliminate gun show internet sale loopholes. We've got to implement red flag laws and protect women from violence, domestic violence.
So thank you all. With that, we're going to move on to our closing statements. You have 1 minute each, and we're going to start off this time with Chris.
Thank you. So hopefully the voters have seen that we have 9 Democrats. We all hold our democratic values dearly. Where we differ really is in the experience that we bring. I will tell you that I have not been building my resume to run for this office. I do not view this as a stepping stone to another office. I've been out building jobs, and creating opportunity to bring people together, to make educational opportunities available to people who've been marginalized. I've heard a lot tonight about fighting. And folks, I want to ask you, have we had enough fighting down in Washington? Now, don't get me wrong. The one thing that I've done in politics before this was to be an intern for the late Senator Ted Kennedy. And what I learned from him was that we can fiercely advocate our policies and our values, and at the same time, find a way to work with people to get things done. This is what I will do down in Washington. I will drive for our values, and I will find a way to create win-win solutions so we can get things done. I hope I can earn your vote.
Thank you. Ben.
Yes, thank you again to the Newton and Brookline Democratic Committees for putting together tonight's forum. Like so many other people, I jumped into this race because I was sick and tired of the divisions we were seeing in this country, and sick and tired of seeing the gap of those who have and have not continuing to expand. But I believe that we can only solve the big issues of the day that we talked about together today if we all come together, because we are so much stronger when we are united than when we are divided. It's the entire theme of our campaign, We the Fourth. And it's time now more than ever that we need a leader who's going to listen to, understand, stand with, and amplify the voices of everyone in the community and not just a privileged few. I have been that leader for the last 20 years. I've been that leader in this campaign, being the only one visiting 34 cities and towns in the district, the only one going to over 20 different marches and rallies and protests in over 15 towns and district. And I will be that leader as your next member of Congress. So please go to bensiegelforcongress.com, and I hope to have your vote on September 1st.
Thank you. Jesse?
Thank you so much, Sharon and Cindy, and to everyone for watching. I'm grateful for the opportunity to have been with you tonight. And I hope that I've demonstrated to you that I'm the candidate with the experience, the vision, and the coalition to deliver the bold, progressive leadership that this district deserves. You know, when I launched my campaign in October in Fall River, I never could have imagined that the fights of my life, the fight for a fair and just economy, the fight for opportunity for everyone, would have been even more important now than they were back then. But because of a global pandemic and because of Donald Trump's failed leadership, we're seeing those issues in such stark relief now. It means this is a moment for a proven progressive fighter, not just someone who will say the right things or vote the right way, but someone with the track record to deliver the results that working families throughout this district need. And I've built a 20-year career here in Massachusetts doing just that. In this moment of crisis, as we think about who can deliver on the words spoken tonight, I hope that you'll agree that I'm that candidate. I ask for your vote on September 1st, and I look forward to representing you in Washington.
Thank you. Natalia?
We're in the midst of a global pandemic, and that's why 200 doctors, nurses, deans of school of public health, and medical schools have endorsed me. They believe that we need a leader who knows the science, who will listen to scientists, and who will be there to ensure that our COVID recovery is equitable. During normal circumstances, any of these candidates would be great, but we are not in normal circumstances. I'm an epidemiologist. I have 10 years of experience at the United Nations. I have led through crises at the local level, at the New York City Health Department. I have done risk communication during Ebola. I have been a speechwriter at the UN. I really know how to get us out of this mess, and I have a plan. I can lead and I can serve, and that's why I've stepped in. I have 3 little kids. I would not be in this race if I didn't think that my unique skill set as a scientist is what our district needs right now, and it's also what our country needs right now. Thank you.
Hassan?
Successfully muted. Look, our district deserves a representative who brings our diversity and our courage, who comes from multiple, multi-faith, multi-generational, multiracial backgrounds, who brings in those lived experiences that the most vulnerable in our communities are going through. So we can unite our districts. We can bring those who have economic comfort to stand up for those who don't. That's the gold. That's the part that where I come in. That's why I've been building this coalition for Medicare for all, for a Green New Deal, for getting corporate money out of politics. I have done the job. I'm the only candidate who have fought against the biggest corporations on Wall Street as a Federal Reserve regulator. And I want you to take a closer look at that and see that all these policies that we agree on need somebody who can stand up to the corporate greed and who does not take a dime of their money. That's why I stood up to Joe Kennedy when I ran against him in May. That's why I will stand up to anyone, even if they're our own. And I look forward to having your vote. Thank you so much for having me.
Alan?
Thank you. This has been a great discussion. I think you can tell that basically we all largely agree on the issues. So I think the questions you have to ask yourself is who has the experience, the track record, and the strategy to take this extraordinary moment and actually get these things done. We have lots of lawyers and legislators and lobbyists in Congress. We don't have enough movement leaders. We're in a time of movement politics. It began with the Women's March. I was a co-founder of the Boston Women's March and a co-founder of the Sister March Network. It continued with March for Our Lives. I helped to build that. I've been a movement leader that has gotten 3 pieces of legislation through Congress and beat Tom DeLay when he tried to kill AmeriCorps and beat McConnell when he tried to stop Obama's legislation the first 100 days. I've learned that it's not about me. It's about how do you bring people together around values, commitment, and working together. That's the approach I would bring if I have the chance to serve. And I'd be honored to have your vote and your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Becky?
I first ran for city council shortly after Donald Trump was elected, feeling like I think so many of us did, that I wanted to step up and get more, and that it was time to get in the fight. And for me, that was running for office. That same motivation fuels me today. And I believe that because of short-sighted leadership in Washington, we are abdicating our responsibility to leave a better world for the generations to come. We need to elect new and different types of leaders to take on powerful special interests. Right now, out of 435 members of Congress, we only have 25 who are mothers of school-aged children. Imagine what we could do if we had 100 or 250 moms of young kids in Congress. Imagine the progress we could make on paid family and medical leave. Imagine the progress we could make on quality, affordable health care for everyone. Imagine what we could do in combating the climate emergency, which is here and growing. I am running with the passion and commitment of a mom committed to protecting our working families and our kids now and for the generations to come.
Thank you. Dave?
Well, thanks again, Sharon and Cindy. Look, this job would be new for all of us, but the work is not new for me. I have taken on the biggest fights and corporations in this country. It's what led me into public service, from a classroom in the South Bronx all the way to the Oval Office in the White House. Yes, we are in a genuine crisis, but it's also a moment of opportunity. We can pass a Green New Deal. We can pass Medicare for all. We can overturn Citizens United. We can beat Donald Trump. I know because I have. But as Democrats, we've been right on these issues, just not very good at explaining why. So let's elect someone who can tell our story. Let's elect someone who has already fought and won on these issues. I'm the only candidate who's put out a pledge disavowing dark money and super PAC money. I'm not taking a dime of fossil fuel money or police union money. I've committed to traveling offices across the district. My website's not just in English, but Spanish and Portuguese, because when I say I talk to everyone, I mean everyone. Go to davecavell.com. Join a movement that can't be bought. My former boss, Michelle Obama, used to tell young people, there's so much history yet to be made. Let's make some together.
Thank you. Jake?
6 months ago, nobody could have predicted the situation we find ourselves in today. 6 months from now, none of us can predict what the world will look like, but we do know that it will be the most consequential term of Congress in our lifetimes. We need leaders who have grappled with crisis and uncertainty to be able to represent the Massachusetts 4th. As a Marine officer, I led through crisis, commanding Americans from all walks of life overseas on 2 tours, giving me a visceral appreciation for foreign policy and making myself an effective messenger on our shared priorities for gun safety. In business, I've led teams through uncertainty to build products for an environmentally sustainable future. And in Newton, I've built coalitions on hard problems on housing and transportation, immigration, and the environment, because that's what good legislators do. They build coalitions through thorny challenges, and they get actual laws passed to improve lives for everybody. I am the candidate in this race who can lead through crisis, through uncertainty, and through coalitions.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. And thank you to the many, many people who have been listening tonight. Remember these deadlines coming up to register for the primary. The deadline is Saturday, August 22nd. The deadline to request your vote by mail ballot is August 26th. And please remember to return your absentee ballots so that they can be received by the city or town clerk by September 1st. If you are planning to vote in person, primary day is September 1st. Thank you very much. We hope you all get out to vote, and thank you to all the candidates who have spent this time with us this evening.